This is a video about why Colion Noir is wrong about guns and suicide. Colion Noir is not a mental health expert. He's a guns rights activist. And he makes dangerous claims about guns and suicide that misinform or disinform the general population. This is Colion Noir's argument for why he thinks guns and suicide do not share a direct correlation.
Suicides aren't a gun problem. If they were, America with its over 300 million guns would lead the world in suicides, but we're not even in the top 20.
Again, Colion Noir is not qualified to make this argument. He is not a mental health expert, and he doesn't cite any relevant sources or studies for us to take his claim seriously. So what do the mental health experts actually have to say about this conversation? Looking at the New England Journal of Medicine, they published an article in 2000, a study in 2008 titled Guns and Suicide in the United States by David Hemingway and Matthew Miller. In that article, they evaluated states with high rates of firearm ownership in contrast to states with low rates of firearm ownership. As you can see, the table of data is on screen now. In that data, we see that states with higher rates of gun ownership have a significantly higher rates of firearm suicides, both in male and female categories. But non-firearm suicides are relatively equal among states with higher rates of gun ownership and states with low rates of gun ownership, both in the male and female category. So we can see that one of the reasons why states with high rates of gun ownership have a significantly higher rate of suicides is primarily because of the guns. Looking at now Harvard University, they published an article on this titled Guns and Suicide, Its Hidden Toll. Right now on screen should be a image of the title cover page so you can verify you're at the right article that I'm using. Scrolling down from that cover page, they talk to and have a quote from Catherine Barber that I would like to address. Catherine Barber is the director of Harvard's Injury Control Research Center Means Matter campaign. The Means Matter campaign is an awareness campaign to address specifically how individuals that attempt suicide, the methods they use, how they are attempting suicide, because how they are attempting suicide determines how fatal the suicide actually is, or whether or not the suicide attempt is fatal, to clarify. So what does Catherine Barber have to say about this? When we compare people in gun-owning households to people not in gun-owning households, there was no difference in terms of rates of mental illness or in terms of the proportion saying they had seriously considered suicide. Actually, among gun owners, a smaller proportion said they had attempted suicide. So it's not that the gun owners are more suicidal, it's that they're more likely to die in the event they become suicidal because they are using a gun. So again, guns and suicides are relevant not because guns create mental health issues, but that because individuals with mental health issues right now in this country have easy access to guns. Family members and loved ones can't remove them without violating their rights. And guns are one of the more deadliest forms of suicide. And this is proven through other data points, actually. American Psychological Association right now has a study they published about this topic. In 2013, a panel of experts actually published this thing. As you can see on screen right now, there is the cover page of a PDF I downloaded of this study. The study is titled, as you can see, Gun Violence, Prediction, Prevention, and Policy. The next thing you can see on the screen is the panel of experts they hired and their expertise. You can Google them, research, do what you want to verify these individuals. What's relevant from this study on this specific topic is their section 6. On section 6 now on screen, you can see that there are some statistics on the paragraph below. In that paragraph, it says that 80.7% of individuals that attempt suicide with a gun have a fatal result. In contrast, individuals that attempt suicide with the most common form, ingesting pills, had a fatal rate of 2.5%. So as we can see, despite the fact that pills are a more common form of suicide attempt, guns are significantly more lethal, primarily because a gun is a very deadly tool. That's why it's a tool of war and why we don't shoot pills at our enemies. There's also other relevant data to prove that guns are more of an issue to suicides. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, has a database called the WONDER database. WONDER. That database, you can look up causes of death throughout the country, and I did from 2015 to 2019. In that database, you look up the cause list ICD-10113. It is a defined cause list that the CDC uses to define causes of death. In that cause list, if you evaluate deaths from suicide, you find that the majority of gun deaths, 61%, over 2015 to 2019, were suicides. The National Institute of Mental Health also found, using the CDC data in 2018, that 50% of suicides were used with a gun. And so that guns are a serious issue when we're talking about suicides, primarily because they're so deadly and they're easily accessible. There's another point I would like to make that is in relation to this problem, the final point in relation to evidence, and that is that study I mentioned, Guns and Suicide in the United States, published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2008, also evaluated the decision-making around suicides and found that suicides are rather an impulsive decision. 24% of individuals who decide to commit suicide act within 5 minutes of that decision. 70% of individuals that decide to commit suicide act within an hour. Combining those two statistics, approximately 94% of individuals that commit suicide do so within an hour. The impulsiveness is important because you may feel like right now you do not think that as a gun owner you're suicidal or that anyone in your family is suicidal, and so that it is not an important concern to you. But that's why this impulsiveness point is important. Because one of the reasons these individuals impulsively acted to commit suicide was because of a vulnerable point in their life they didn't anticipate, usually, or that they might have even anticipated. These, as the American Psychological Association on page 17 point out, and this study, Guns and Suicide in the United States, some of the circumstances surrounding these suicide attempts are divorces, breakups, job losses. And so it is not out of the realm to think that suicides within you or your family are out of the question, not because everyone's mentally ill or disabled, but because bad things happen. And that owning a gun does not make your house safer, just based on the facts. Okay, so to summarize, gun owners, essentially owning a gun does not make your house safer. Doing so is an illusion. It's not logical. The facts show that owning a gun makes it more likely than anything you commit suicide. That's what most of the data points say are gun deaths in this country are suicides. And you also can't always anticipate these things because they're impulsive, as I have shown with the data points. So there are solutions to this, and I do believe I should post and argue or at least point out some solutions. You shouldn't argue for a problem if you don't have solutions. But that first we have to identify that there is a problem. We have to agree there is a problem, because we can't move forward until we do so. We can't solve a problem unless we identify and agree there is one. So before we start talking about solutions, the gun community, you guys have to come to terms that Colion Noir is not correct. Guns and suicide are related and there is an issue. Now to Mr. Noir. You have a right to go on YouTube and lie to your audience. You have a right to go on Bill Maher and lie to his audience. But there are intellectual standards in which you are not allowed to just make things up. Reality doesn't change just because you lie to people. The facts are, guns and suicide are related. It's just a fact. People who are actually qualified to have this conversation have established that fact. If you want to have a debate on science and the last 2,000 years of philosophy, you can have that conversation. But given that you're a lawyer, I'm running on the assumption that you know you don't know what you're talking about. You know you wouldn't meet the standards you would have to in a courtroom. And so you know what you're doing is immoral. It's unethical. You're misinforming, or actually disinforming, because disinformation is dishonest. Your intent is to misinform them on purpose, not by mistake. This is on purpose. Because you can't sell t-shirts advocating for gun legislation. That's not what your community wants. This is about selling a t-shirt for you. It's immoral and it's dangerous. The gun community is killing themselves mainly because they have an access to a gun. And as you continue to misinform them that it isn't an issue, they don't believe it is one. So now we can't even have a conversation on this topic about the solutions, because we're stuck at whether or not it's a problem. Not because we don't know, but because you're a liar. And you want to market off of this idea, this conversation. So you have two options. Start doing your homework so we can have a serious conversation about this, or acknowledge that you're wrong, you've been lying this whole time, and that there is an issue with guns and suicide. And there's actually a third problem. You could just shut up. That is an option. You have the right to open your mouth, but you don't have to. The gun community should be part of this conversation, but we can't have a conversation if you don't agree there's a problem. You are not doing a good service to your community by lying to them on this subject, because they can't defend themselves from a home invasion or from a tyrannical government if they're dead. And you don't come out in most of your videos and premise the fact that most gun deaths result in suicide. And so before you go off talking about guns and defending yourself or fighting the government, understand that you should seek a mental health provider or some form of disclaimer or some kind of point that illustrates that mental health is a greater concern to your community than you lead on to believe. You lead on to argue. So aside from the fact that you're wrong, that you're dishonest, that you're a liar, and that you're an immoral person doing this for money, your own community is hurting because of it. Be part of the solution, Mr. Noir, or get out of the way.